What happens now? That may well be the question being asked by No King's protesters who marched, rallied, and danced all over the nation on Saturday, Oct. 18, 2025. Pro-democracy groups had aimed to encourage large numbers of Americans to demonstrate that together we are choosing democracy. They were successful, with crowds turning out for demonstrations in thousands of cities and towns from Anchorage to Miami. And while multiple GOP leaders had attacked the planned demonstrations, describing them as hate America rallies, political science scholars and national security experts agree that the current US administration's actions are indeed placing the world's oldest continuous constitutional republic in jeopardy. Once a democracy starts to erode, it can be difficult to reverse the trends. Only 40 of democracies affected by autocratization, a transformation in governance that erodes democratic safeguards since 1985, or have rebounded after a democratic breakdown, according to Swedish research institute VDEM. Often termed democratic backsliding, such periods involve government-led changes to rules and norms to weaken individual freedoms and undermine or eliminate checks on power exercised by independent institutions, both governmental and non-governmental. Democracies that have suffered setbacks vary widely from Hungary to Brazil. As a long-term practitioner of democracy building overseas, I know that none of these countries rival the United States' constitutional traditions, federalist system, economic wealth, military discipline, and vibrant independent media, academia, and non-profit organizations. Even so, practices used globally to fight democratic backsliding or topple autocracies can be instructive. In a nutshell, nonviolent resistance is based on non-cooperation with autocratic actions. It has proven more effective in toppling autocracies than violent armed struggle. But it requires more than street demonstrations and embedded content tactics used by pro-democracy movements. So, what does it take for democracies to bounce back from periods of autocratic rule? Broad-scale coordinated mobilization of a sufficient percentage of the population against autocratic takeover and for a renewed democratic future is necessary for success. That momentum can be challenging to generate. Would-be autocrats create environments of fear and powerlessness, using intimidation, overwhelming force, or political and legal attacks and other coercive tactics to force acquiescence and chill democratic pushbacks. Autocrats can't succeed alone. They rely on what scholars call pillars of support, a range of government institutions, security forces, business, and other sectors in society to obey their will and even bolster their power grabs. However, everyone in society has power to erode autocratic support in various ways. While individual efforts are important, collective action increases impact and mitigates the risks of reprisals for standing up to individuals or organizations. Here are some of the tactics used by those movements across the world. 1. Refuse unlawful, corrupt demands. When enough individuals in critical roles and institutions, the military, civil servants, corporate leaders, state government, and judges refuse to implement autocratic orders that can slow or even stop an autocratic takeover. In South Korea, parts of the civil service, legislature, and military declined to support President Yoon Suk-yeol's imposition of martial law in 2024 following his autocratic moves. Visibly bolster the rule of law, where would-be autocrats disregard legal restraints and install their supporters in the highest courts. Individual challenges to overreach, even if successful, can be insufficient. In Poland, legal challenges in courts combined with public education by the judiciary, lawyers, associations, initiatives, and street protests like the March of 1,000 Robes in 2020 signal widespread repudiation of the autocratic government's attacks on the rule of law. 3. Unite in opposition. This year's Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Corina Machado from Venezuela is an example of how political parties and leaders who cooperate across differences can offer an alternative vision. Novel candidates can undermine the ability of autocrats to sow division and demonize major opponents. However, coalitions can be difficult to form and sustain to win. Based on experiences overseas, historian Anne Applebaum, author of Autocracy Inc., has called for a pro-democracy coalition in the US that could unite independents, libertarians, the Green Party, dissident Republicans, and the Democratic Party. Fourth, harness economic power every day. Consumers can pressure wealthy elites and corporations that acquiesce to or prop up would-be autocrats through boycotts and other methods, like the Tesla takedown in the US that preceded a drop in Tesla share value and owner Elon Musk's departure from his government role. General strikes, led by labor unions and professional associations, as in Sudan or Myanmar, can be particularly effective. Phase. Preempt electoral manipulation. Voting autocrats out of office remains the best way to restore democracy, demonstrated recently by the U-turn in Brazil, where a pro-democracy candidate defeated the hard-right incumbent. But this requires strategic action to keep elections truly free and fair well in advance of election day. Tits. Organize your community as in campaigns in India starting in 2020 and Chile in 2019. Participating in community or private conversation forums, local town halls or councils, and non-partisan student, veterans, farmers, women's, and religious groups provides a space to share concerns, exchange ideas, and create avenues to take action. Often starting with trusted networks, local initiatives can tap into broader statewide or national efforts to defend democracy. Second, shape the story. Driving public opinion and communicating effectively is critical to pro-democracy efforts. Serbian students created one of the largest protest movements in decades, starting in 2024 using creative resistance artistic expression, such as visual mediums, satire, and social media to expose an autocrat's weaknesses, reduce fear and hopelessness, and build collective symbolism and resilience. Eighth, build bridges and democratic alternatives. Bringing together people across ideological and other divides can increase understanding and counter political polarization, particularly when religious leaders are involved. Even in autocratic countries like Turkey or during wartime as in Ukraine, deepening democratic practices at state and local levels like citizen assemblies and the use of technologies that improve the quality of public decision-making can demonstrate ways to govern differently. Parallel institutions, such as schools and tax systems operating outside the formal repressive system, like during Slobodan Milosevic's decade-long crackdown in Kosovo,